What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Dad Edge Podcast. I'm Larry Hagner, your host and founder of this show, Men on Fire. That's what we're talking about today, men on fire. That's exactly what this generation needs, is men on fire, men who have passion, men who have purpose, men who have intention. That's what it's all about. And today I am interviewing New York Times bestselling author of this book, which is Men on Fire, Restoring the Forces That Forge Noble Manhood by Stephen Mansfield. He also wrote Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, as well as Building a Band of Brothers. Stephen Mansfield is the man. I mean, he's got man in his name, so why wouldn't he be? He's come on the show before. If you don't know who Stephen Mansfield is, you might be one of 5 people who don't. He is an incredible, legendary, amazing man. He's got 2 kids. He's been married. He is... I believe he's 55 years old. He's got a 30-year-old son. He's got a grown daughter as well who's moved out. But for today, we go over, he's got 7 chapters in this book. The book's an easy read. I've read it twice. But he talks about the 7 fires of men. Today, we go over 3. And there's even a bonus conversation here that wasn't expected, but it's actually on the front end. But I'll share that what that is here at the end here. But what we do here first is the first thing we go through is claiming our heritage, the fire of heritage. And I'm sure you're probably scratching your head like, well, what does that have to do with being a man? It's embracing things that we've been through, good and bad, and making decisions to take the golden nuggets from the good and even the bad and point that in a direction to where we are going to build a legacy with our own family. So if you've come from an upbringing of challenge, it's a way to not be a victim around challenge, but a way to harness that and then make it better, to break the pattern, right? He even shares a story in his book and on this podcast about Winston Churchill, some little known facts about little Winston growing up and what his father was like. Also, men are called to be warriors, the fire of warrior. And you guys hear it in our intro. We are warriors. We are dads, right? It probably sounds familiar. You've heard it a million times. But in his book, he goes over the 7 prayers of being a warrior, father, husband, the battle for ourselves. Gentlemen, this is something I'm super passionate about. He even goes further to talk about in the book and on this podcast is battling the stupid within ourselves, because sometimes we can be pretty idiotic, yours truly included. So he's going to give us real strategies on how we can win that battle, even when we're battling ourselves. When the biggest opponent is the one that's staring us in the mirror, right? The final thing that we go over in this particular podcast is the fire of friendship. And he talks about something called a rust relationship. And I'm sure you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. A rust relationship is when we have relationships with men that are very, very distant. So it's the guy who is in your wedding that you no longer really talk to. Maybe talk to him every 5 years. It's the college buddies that when you think about them, you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Or maybe it's your neighbors that you have like an acquaintance with where you wave like, hey, Charlie, how are you? How's work? How are the kids? That's about it, right? Those are rust relationships. Those are relationships that don't necessarily serve us anymore. In a real relationship where he talks about having a band of brothers, a tribe, a council of advisors, this is critical in our lives. And he goes through why that's critical and what happens to our life if we don't have that, because many of us don't. He also is going to go over the free fire zone, which I have men in my life that, hey, like, sit me down. You see something going on that you think is out of my core values or out of being who I am, sit me down and you have the free fire zone. You tell me what you see so I can adjust. That's what friends do who really care about you. And then the bonus conversation that we have in here that I didn't expect to have, but Stephen brought it up and I just kept going with it. And that's how to talk to our kids about porn, right? We're raising kids now in a generation where porn has never been so accessible. I'm sure you guys can probably relate to when we were kids and you had to go and take your mom and dad's VHS tapes, and that was if you were lucky. Or like I remember kids that I was friends with, they traded like their bikes for like a dirty magazine, right? Now all you need is a phone, right? All you need is a phone. That's what we're talking about in today's show. Also, today's show is sponsored by our partner, Bark, which, speaking of porn, if you have a kid that can access the internet in any way, shape, or form, and you're worried about what websites they're accessing, but yet you have no idea because they keep going in there and erasing their history and you don't really know what they're seeing, you can use a resource that a lot of our community members use, and that's Bark. Bark is a resource and an app that you can download onto your home computer and onto the kids' phones. And what it'll do is it'll track their text messages, it'll track their social media, emails, and even their browsing history. So anything like violence or cyberbullying or adult content or anything, you will get an alert and you will see exactly what it is that they're searching. Bark even takes that a step further, and they give you suggestions on how you can best have conversations when it comes to anything, whether it be violence, depression, cyberbullying, adult content, even suicidal ideation. A lot of times we have no idea what demons our kids are facing, but all the clues are sitting there in their phone. I'm with you on this. I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. They both have phones, and I've been using Bark now for a year. I got to tell you, it's a game changer. So make sure you check out Bark. Go to gooddadproject.com/Bark. Use our coupon code GoodDad upon checkout. You'll save 10% on your monthly subscription, which is only $8.10 for peace of mind. Trust me, it's worth it. I would pay 10 times that for this resource just to have it. All right, gentlemen, no more talk from me. Here's my interview with the man, the myth, the legend, the Mansfield, Mr. Stephen Mansfield. Here we go. Stephen Mansfield, good to have you back on the Dad Edge podcast, my friend.
It's great. What did I do last time that caused it to be 3 years since before the next time I was asked? Did I offend you in some way or what?
Oh man, I think if you were to leave it up to me, I'd love to do the Stephen and Larry show on a weekly basis. So yeah, it's been
very kind, very kind, very kind. No, I'm just hassling you.
Yeah, so I am super excited about today. Obviously put eyes on your book, pen to paper, took a lot of notes during your book and loved the message, but I love your overall message for men. But before we get started, one question I really like to start with, and I've been doing this now just over the past year or so, and that is getting started with your own childhood, the own relationship you have with your own father and parents, and what that was like for you growing up.
Great question. I was raised in the home of an Army officer, and an Army officer who specialized in intelligence. So that meant not only did he serve in Korea, Vietnam, and Iran in his own career, but I ended up living a lot of time in Germany. So we were in Berlin during my high school years. And earlier in my elementary school years, we were in Schweinfurt, Germany. Not that matters to most people. Well, I think what's most important from the standpoint of what we're talking about today is that my father was an exemplary, high-ranking, highly awarded, decorated officer. But he was not. He did not have the ability to connect well with his son. I was in a high masculine world. I was in a high character-oriented world. I was in a high achievement and noble culture, serve the country, defend the oppressed, that kind of thing. I was a lot of performance was expected of me, but my father could never put an arm around me and tell me he loved me. For those who know the movie, The Great Santini kind of describes my father, although The Great Santini was a drunk. My father didn't drink heavily at all. But still, the relationship between father and son kind of shows that. So even though I had this very exemplary, amazing, awarded, presidents walked with this guy, the fact is that I left home at 18, went to college, didn't know how to shave. I didn't know how to use a straight razor to shave, or a safety razor to shave. Didn't know how to change the oil in my car. Didn't know how to run a checking account. So a lot of what's the story of my life is to be in the supercharged American military environment, and yet to have older brothers in college who really took me under their wing and taught me what I needed to know as a man. And that was kind of the pattern for the rest of my life. So that describes no abuse, nothing terrible, nobody misbehaving, just military distant, at war, away. And when he was home, he really wasn't capable of relating to his son very well. So thank God, as in many of our lives, other men stepped in, older brothers in college stepped in and taught me everything from how to date to how to swing a baseball bat, to how to shave, and that's one of the reasons I lean so strongly towards the theme of a band of brothers. I think they can make all the difference in our lives.
Well, it looks like your brothers taught you well. I mean, look at how clean shaven you are today. So.
I'm going to catch a plane when this is over, so I have to look good. But I figured it out.
Fair. And is your dad still with us?
No, both my parents have passed away.
Okay.
And then later in life, I need to say, Dad, gentled up as men tend to do as they get older. We were close and friendly. So it's not a gaping father wound like some guys have. The father never comes near. It was a combination of him just being at war, for which I can't blame him. 18 months in Vietnam, a year in Iran, things like that. And then just the fact that when he was home, he just didn't know how to do it. His generation had a hard time, quite frankly.
And what do you think that did for you as a father and how you show up?
It because I had such grinding questions when I was growing up as a man. I was able to anticipate my son's questions. Every father's going to make mistakes, and I made some mistakes with my son. Thank God, none of them just the horrible, deforming type. But I was able to. The good thing about me was I was able to anticipate my son's questions. I knew what he was going to ask. And I also believe in not being crass, but being very blunt about man things. So when my son turned 12, we went for a drive to a state park and had a ball and ate pizza at 3 a.m. and all that stuff. But while we were driving, we were talking about sex. Why is it you get a little squirmy thing going in your pants when Susie is wearing the miniskirt at homeroom? That kind of stuff. And it wasn't being nasty. I was telling him, I understand your world. Welcome to the lore of men. We understand what a scantily clad girl does to us. We understand what a shapely girl does to us. I understand the appeal of porn. Not stupid. I understand what it's like to have your privates changed and all that kind of thing. I understand what it's like to be humiliated in homeroom. And so that not only created closeness between us, but it didn't cause him to step out in the world with a level of insecurity that I did. So, you can use what's lacking in your past to fill in your present with your own children. And that's what I did. And at the same time, I have one son, one daughter. It allowed me to speak to my daughter in the same terms. Now, honey, I'm a man and I know what it's like to be 16. So let me tell you what effect you're having on them. Let me tell you what that might get you into. Let me tell you what you're going to have to do. And you understand I have 6 or 7 guns, right? So, it's that kind of, we could be humorous about it. So, yeah, all of that lack in my early life allowed me to fill in with my kids. And, if they laugh about anything now that they're in their 30s, it's that the first one to talk about anything physical or sexual or drugs or depression or anything was Dad. Dad was there first before they heard it in the locker room or before they saw it in a nasty movie or before they, somebody tried to pull something with them. So I'm grateful for that contribution to their lives.
You brought up a subject that I wasn't prepared to ask about, but since you brought it up, I'm very curious. I have 4 boys, 14, 12, 6, and 4. I've had the porn talk with my 12-year-old and 14-year-old now. It's been a while. But I got to tell you, I didn't really grow up with a father figure myself, and navigating those waters of what that conversation looked like. I did basically what you did, which is, I found the Free Fire Zone man, the group, the community to help me through that conversation. But how, now that you have a son that's older, kids that are older, what advice do you have for us men who are raising young men and are really just trying to navigate that conversation in a non-threatening sort of way, to where it can be an open discussion where we obviously want to share some morals and values and the things that how it can do harm down the road, even though at 12 years old and 14 years old, they don't really understand the harm that can do. But What advice do you have for us on that one?
A couple of things. First of all, get comfortable with the subject yourself.
Yeah.
Talk to your band of brothers. Don't be nervous. There's this kind of lore we see on TV where the father's all nervous about having the talk with his sons. Well, it's his nervousness that's in the way. Why are we nervous about that? Every kid on the planet, every male on the planet has got to deal with these things about his body, about porn, about the way, people look, and et cetera. So what's in the way is your nervousness. I don't mean you personally. I'm just talking about men in general. Yeah. And when I'm going after you, I'll let you know. Okay. So, what I'm saying is, first of all, get comfortable. Second of all, in DC where I work a lot, we talk about getting there firstest with the mostest, meaning in a PR situation, don't let the press figure something out and come at you get there first with the firstest with the mostest. If you've done something wrong, be the one to tell them. And, in other words, pop the balloon. Well, I feel like that's the same principle for men with their sons and their daughters. Get there firstest with the mostest. I brought these things up with my son. I told him what was going to happen with body hair before he experienced it. I told him what was going to happen with his voice. And I developed just a natural, I could have said, son, let's grab a hamburger tonight. And he might know we're just going to hang, or he might know I want to tell him the next stage and what's going to happen with him. And he was looking forward to it because then life didn't smack him in the face. Right. Plus he didn't feel the shame factor. I won't be overly graphic here, but without being in any way inappropriate, I would describe what a shapely girl could do to a man and make him feel. And so now when Susie Q shows up in homeroom, tightly dressed, my son is thinking about what his father's said rather than what he may have heard in the locker room or seen in that movie. I don't know that he watched, at the age of 12, or what his friends have said to him. So it was constantly, as the military says, a preemptive strike. I was constantly getting there first. And then the third thing actually, is I opened up a two-way channel.
Okay.
Dude, you can walk in anytime and say, what does the F word mean? You can walk in anytime and say, I don't know what this nasty word is I heard in the locker room the other day. What does that mean? A girl offered to do such and such. I don't know what that. Come tell me. I'm your guy. It'll be confidential. I'll give it to you straight. I won't be mad because you're using language, unless of course you're using it out on the street in some inappropriate way. So talk to me. So my son would ask questions that I'm not going to tell you what they were, but sometimes I had a little giggle when we were finished, just in my own office or something, because they're the international, man code questions that we all ask.
Sure.
But I felt I was proud of myself, to be frank with you, and proud of what God had done in my life, to be able to have that two-way dialogue. So I think men should get there first. And by the way, by me modeling for him a real relaxed aspect, hey, this is going to be great when the time comes, but let me tell you what's happening to you in the meantime. He is he's going to get married this fall, and he's at peace about these things. He knows what he's doing. He knows what's going on. He knows how to honor a woman. There's no big nervousness. He's not got to, I'd be fine with him to talk to a minister or talk to somebody who's an expert in sex, but he pretty much knows everything, believe it or not, from talking to his father. So that's what I recommend. And I recommend it start early. When we look at the stats of when boys are being exposed to porn, and by the way, this is not just the cover of Playboy, this is hardcore porn. Fathers could certainly talk to a child too early. But I would say 10, 11, 12, you better be on it. Yeah. Because they have already seen it. They've already seen something, and there's no reason to mess around.
I love that. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes.
Absolutely. No problem at all.
I love that, getting comfortable, the preemptive strike and the two-way channel. And you're right. The other thing too, what are your thoughts on removing shame and guilt? So I think that goes to this two-way channel idea. So with my kids, with my sons, I told them, we started early. I think we started this conversation at 10 or 11. So right around that age. And I told them, we had the sex talk first, and then we had the porn talk. And I was like, look, it's not a question of if you see this, it's when. Okay. And the one thing that I want to do is I want to keep this line of communication open with you, because the worst thing that could happen is you see this, you don't know what you just saw, you have no one to talk to about it. And then there's shame, and then there's guilt, and then you hide in the shadows. And I don't want that for you. That's not a way to live. And in fact, if you come to me and tell me, hey, Dad, this is what I saw, I have questions, my mind is just racing, I have no idea what to even think of this, you are not going to be in trouble. You will not be punished. We'll have an open discussion with it. I will tell you everything that you need to know. But we need to have this open dialogue, because one of the most harmful things for you to do is to go in the shadows of shame and guilt. What are your thoughts on, expressing that shame and guilt? Like, hey, we need to be open about this. We need to talk about this. You shouldn't shame yourself for it. Such a great question. Let's be clear. Shame is really conviction. I mean, being convicted after the fact. Shame is what you ought to feel when you do something wrong, right? I steal the cookies. I take your wallet. I should feel convicted. I should feel shame. I should feel badly about that. So it brings me to do the right thing. When I'm walking away from your house, having stolen your wallet, I should feel so badly about that. I turn around, apologize, and give it back to you, and then feel normal again. Mm-hmm.
shame should not be something we feel all the time about sex.
Mm-hmm.
I want the 17-year-old to go, I understand sex. My father's explained it to me. Can't wait to have it. And I don't feel shame about it. I think it's awesome. I think it's a gift from God. But I'm going to, I'm going to be aware that when I feel shame, it's because I've done something wrong. So I talked to my son about that long ago. You're looking at porn, I want you to feel shame. You're using nasty sexual language or being inappropriate with a girl, I want you to feel shame. In fact, I want you to come to me with that shame after you address whatever's going on elsewhere. But we don't want them to feel shame. Shame has actually screwed up sex for generations. Shame, I mean, I don't get angrier than when somebody's in a religious situation where we ought to be celebrating sex as the gift of God and then using it appropriately. But instead, that false religiosity regarding sex causes it not to be discussed, not to be mentioned. We cut Song of Solomon out of our Bibles because it's so sexual. That kind of stuff. That's only doing damage. That's only doing damage. People will experiment. People will wonder. People will touch themselves. You got to be there to help them understand what that means and blow up the shame for anything but inappropriate behavior. So once I explained that to my son before he ever felt shame, he was like, okay. And so now, not now because he's in his mid 30s, but back in the day, I would say, okay, anything you're feeling shame about that you're doing. I mean, this is even when he was in college. I'd say, we talked about shame. Anything you're feeling shame about? Yeah, I kind of feel badly about, and I'll say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Or let's pray about that. Or, what got you there? Because you didn't set out to feel shame after that date. What was it that led you there? And he wasn't doing anything horrible, but he's a good kid trying to be a good kid in this world. So if we understand the purpose of shame and blow it up everywhere it's not supposed to be, then we're okay. You shouldn't feel shame because you have sexual thoughts. You shouldn't feel shame because you look forward to sex. You shouldn't feel shame because you're talking about it in appropriate ways. And that's where I think the father conversations with sons and even with daughters, to the extent that it's appropriate, moms should take care of it if possible, blows up that shame factor. Hey, we're driving down the highway, slipping a big gulp here and talking about, what it means to, in the context of marriage, for intercourse to happen. Well, that's going to pretty much bust up shame, with James Taylor playing on the soundtrack. And so that casual, easygoing, isn't this awesome? When the day comes, it's going to be great. Let's talk about it in the meantime. That blows up shame. And then I tell him, you do something wrong, I want you to feel shame. And by the way, when you come to me, I may help you feel shame. That's kind of my joke with them. Yeah. So I think it's important for us if we understand the function of shame, we know how to encourage it and how to discourage it and how to blow it up where it doesn't need to be.
Stephen, I have all these notes of things I want to talk about with your book, but this is so good. One more question for you before we move on to your book, because I think one of the biggest themes that have come up with the relationship with your kids, especially your son, is you have created this environment of psychological safety where these open discussions can happen. And they're actually, not only can they happen, but they're welcomed. As we just finish out this segment of keeping these conversations going and creating psychological safety, how have you been able to do that? Because it's cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
it really is, as I say, that I'm calm about it. You can tell that I'm even having, it's not like I have a desire to talk about these things in some graphic way, right? But I certainly wouldn't have any problem if you and I were in a private phone call and you said, what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you do that? Why did that happen in my life? I would probably be the most appropriately graphic person in your life. I have no problem talking about any of those things. Part of it is that I'm a certified counselor and have been a pastor in times past. But the other part of it is that in working with men, there's no reason to mess around and shade the truth. So by having that feel and having that ease in myself, I'm casual about sex. I'm not saying I'm immoral. I don't speak inappropriately in wrong context, but sex, manhood, all those things, I'm very much at peace. It doesn't make me nervous. It's fine. The other thing too is really like I say, it's the manner with which you have the conversation. You and I are having a good conversation, partially because you're a good interviewer, but also because I'm at peace about this subject. Now, you could have talked to someone else that when you brought up having the conversation with a 12-year-old, they just puckered up. You know what I'm saying? They just froze up. And I'm not complimenting myself. I'm just saying I'm at peace about those things. I'm at ease about those things. If I find myself ever being a little clumsy in my language, I work on my language. I talk to lots of men, lots of people about this stuff, and I work on being at peace and calm. And that makes them calm. And now we can talk about, even if we're talking about a horrible sexually active background that has screwed up their lives, let's say in a 35-year-old man, still I want to talk about it with calm. I don't want to be sitting there with my hair on fire because he's bringing up, whatever nasty things he's done in the past. So it's about to be frank with you, it's about the feel, the vibe you create in the room. And you can only do that if you're at peace and if you care about the individual. So I just am calm about the subject. There's not anything you can bring out that's going to make me flip out. And when that permeates the relationship, whether it's with my son or with a man who's in trouble or with a couple, then I'm able to do more good than otherwise. And because I was a pastor for 20 years, I got couples ready for marriage, and I still get flowers and gifts and cigars and everything from couples who are going, man, we grew up in contexts where this was never discussed. Thank God you sat us down and said, now, what do you know and what don't you know? And what do you think is right? And how do you perceive this? And what's going to happen on the wedding night? And they had some of the most red-faced, embarrassing conversations they'd ever had, as far as they were concerned. As far as I was concerned, it was normal, but it set their life on the right trajectory. So really, that's how you do it. You just relax. You just realize it's normal. You get calm in yourself. And then now I need to say that the only subject on which you are calm with your son should not be sex. You know what I'm saying? But that's my manner in everything. My son can ask me anything. Why do you do that? Why does that happen? What's this idiot on TV talking about, or whatever? We'll discuss anything. And I'm not threatened. I'm not really threatened. I'm pretty peaceful, pretty calm. I'll tell him sometimes, you can't really, I'm not going to talk about my relationship with your mom, that kind of thing. Or, I don't get graphic about my own sex life, obviously with my kids. But what I'm saying is, if you create a culture around you of easygoing, peaceful conversations that are productive on all subjects, then sex is just part of the weave. And that's what's helped me. That's what's helped me. Calm, peaceful, loving. Anything can be discussed. And if something inappropriate comes up at dinner, I remember a dinner conversation we once had where the entire conversation was about the F word. One of my kids had heard it, wanted to know why it was wrong, or why it was used, or why somebody had said pass the effing salt, not at the table, but somewhere else. And I said, yeah, it's kind of silly the way it's used, but let's discuss it. Let's talk about where it came from. I have a background in linguistics, so I could literally tell them where the F word came from. And here's how it works in our society. Well, see, that conversation was had while we were eating fried chicken. You know what I'm saying? Nobody was freaked out. Nobody started throwing things. Nobody got grounded for bringing the word out. That's what we parents have to do. And we've got to do it proactively because the culture, the society is just pressing in on our kids earlier and more harshly than ever before. So we've got to be the antidote.
Stephen, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate you because you do have this very calming sense about you. This is the third time you and I have ever talked over the past 3 years, but you have this aura about you. And I'm sure you've been told this in the past that I could probably tell you anything. And I know that I'm going to get real-time feedback and I'm not necessarily going to be guilted. You just have this very comforting way about you. So I think if there's anything, even your voice tone, Stephen, your voice tone is just very calming.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, and I'm not just saying that because I really, for you guys, the listeners, if you want, just rewind the past 10 minutes, listen to Stephen's voice tone. And I think if anything, we can obviously take these gems that you're sharing with us, but also creating this environment because the majority of our majority of our communication is not the words we use, but it's how we approach and our body language and our voice tone and all these things. I believe it's only 7% of the words that we use people hear. Everything else is nonverbal communication. And there is something to be said about that, creating psychological safety and just the aura that you put off. I can understand why your son would want to come and talk to you, your daughter probably the same way. And you have to excuse the craziness because we're still in quarantine.
That's fine. Sure. I get it.
So, gentlemen, we are talking to Stephen Mansfield. He just wrote a book, Men on Fire, Restoring the Forces That Forge Noble Manhood. It sounds like my dog is going crazy in the background, by the way.
Sure.
You have the 7 battles, the fire. 7 different things here that you have listed. And I really want to focus on 3 because as I read this book twice, by the way, I loved your first chapter on claiming heritage. And you have this incredible story about Winston Churchill that I never even knew about this part of his life. But can you share with us claiming heritage and maybe share some highlights of Winston's story?
Sure. I believe that we are all made in such a way. Don't worry about it, Dad. I'm not worried about the guys off the side of the camera. I can see you're about to rebuke somebody.
What's going on?
No. I was actually on CNN once, and one of the other guests had their child crawling on them, like we've seen in videos now. And I thought it was hilarious. I believe we're all made to be inflamed, to be energized, to be changed by what comes down through our family lines, what comes down through our heritage. The good things, the noble things. It's easy to look at the past and find the things that are wrong. As an American, of course, I decry slavery. As an American, I decry the abuse of the Native Americans, et cetera. That doesn't make me hate my whole country. So I can take what's good, let that settle in my soul, live out those noble values, especially in my case, I do a lot in the Middle East and foreign nations. But there also ought to be that same thing coming down through your family line. And so I urge men to find the gems, find the nobility, find the powerful things in their family story, and let those things take up residence in them. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then you're tempted to allow the negative that's happened, even if it's the minority of your experience, and cause it to taint your soul. This is the example of Winston Churchill. Churchill's parents were the typical British aristocracy of the time and were very, very distant. In fact, it's probably not going too far to say that for the majority of his life, Winston's father hated him. They sent him off to what the British call public school, which is actually private school for us. There are whole books of little young Winston Churchill writing his father, please come visit me, for years at a time. And the father would make a speech across the street from the school, and because he was a famous politician, and never visit his son. So it was horrible. Later in life, just to condense the story, Churchill decided when his father died, there's a great passage I've got quoted in the book. He said, I decided that I could not be at my father's side in politics, but I would live out his legacy. So rather than allow his father's spite, it was just no question, just spite for him to taint his life and make him a bitter man the rest of his life, he said, I'm going to live out his legacy. I'm going to live out what he deposited me and the good that he did in his public life. And obviously, this is part of what gave us the Winston Churchill we know and love and are grateful for. So I give a bunch of examples in the book of stories where men have gone back, even when their family history is meager and rather oppressed, and they find these gems. In one case, if you've read the book, the one guy with the father who was in prison the whole time, but that father who was a murderer and thief, if I recall correctly, did one thing in prison this guy could build on. And this friend of mine ended up building a massive charity that has a huge impact in the world today, based on the legacy of this one thing his criminal father left him. And so that's what we have to do. And it thrills me. I didn't have a perfect father, but I had a war hero father. I can build on that. I don't know your family story, but it doesn't matter how bad a person's past is, and I'm not assuming yours was, there are things you can build on. And then some guys have got awesome fathers and awesome family histories and noble generations. And then, of course, you want to build on that and take it out to other people. But I'm a big believer in the idea that one of the fires that ought to be just absolutely energizing a man as he lives is the heritage he receives, not only from his people group, Native American, African American, whatever, but also from your individual family line. And I think that if you'll turn your attention to that, you'll find those stories and be animated by them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that, especially the story sometimes that we tell ourselves when we come from these maybe challenging childhoods or, I'm this way because of this, but it's literally being able to cherry pick, well, hey, there were some bad things. Sure, everybody does. Everybody has bad things. However, there are also some gems here that I can start building upon. And I like that a lot. And it's a refreshing way to look at it versus like, I'm a victim versus like, what can I do here? It's asking ourselves better questions of what can I do with this?
Yeah, and I think it's essential. And you can't see much of my office here, but maybe you can see over this shoulder that I've got a photograph of my father back there. I have other things in my office that are from my grandfather, from my grandparents, and they symbolize to me. I come from a long line of military officers. Well, even if they weren't great parents or grandparents, the fact is that's something noble you can build on. My grandfather was paralyzed temporarily in the raid on Berlin to take out Hitler. Well, I got to tell you that my children are going to hear that story, right? They're going to hear that. They're going to know that story. They're going to know that tale. My father fought in Vietnam and did some heroic things for which he was awarded. And I tell those stories to my kids. They know those stories. That lives in them. And my daughter, during this coronavirus thing, has gone through a pretty tough time. She lives in New York, and so she's had a really tough time up there. She got furloughed, et cetera. But she actually said to me, look, if Granddad can rescue that battalion that he rescued in Vietnam in a tough time and in the middle of a war, I'll tell you what, I, as his granddaughter, can get through this. Now, that's what you want to hear. And that's because I chose to pass on a heritage. Now, she's not fighting a war, but she's up there feeling like she's living out a legacy. And that's because somebody kept it alive. And so that's the art of this thing. And all of us men need to do that. As I'm sure you will with your 4 sons, they will live out whatever you passed on to them from the previous legacy. And of course, the way that you personally leave a legacy, and they will be more ennobled than the generations that came before you. And that's the art of this thing.
That, my friend, is living legendary. I love that.
Yeah.
And good. What a wonderful example of your daughter, to allow herself to live within that instead of whatever crisis is going on is managing her. So I really, really appreciate that. Men to be warriors.
Yes.
Man, I loved this chapter. And in particular, this 7, without trying to get emotional here, but I really enjoyed the 7 prayers of a warrior. It really hit me, really, really hit me. I really appreciated that. But the battle for ourselves, Stephen, this one, I run a mastermind group for fathers. We have over 400 men that do life with us on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And none of us are immune to this battle within ourselves. And you even talk about the stupid within. And I would love for you to share just some insight on what is the battle within ourselves and how can we be a better warrior when it comes to the battle within?
If a man is living an examined life, which I think is one of the arts of manhood, you're looking at your life, you're holding yourself up against the models that you want to pattern your life after, you're listening to the counsel of your band of brothers, then you're going to realize there are forces that you've got to subdue in your life. There are things you've got to battle for and things you've got to battle against. Every man's that way. I don't mind sharing with you one of the main battles that I have. Now, I like people and I'm fairly outgoing and so on, but for some reason, and I can break it down psychologically for you another time, but for some reason, I battle the effects of being offended. My soul feels like sometimes it's coated in Velcro and that every offense sticks to me. I don't consider myself a small and petty person, but when I have to battle something in my own soul, I don't have any of the major addictions. I'm not addicted to, from sugar to alcohol to porn to whatever. I don't have any of that stuff. I don't have any, other kinds of things. But for some reason, I have had some bludgeoning in my life from people, and that may have tenderized me to offense. So if I'm not careful, I can remember an episode in my life for the offenses that I endured rather than the good things that were happening at the time, like we just talked about with heritage. And so I have to battle for forgiveness. I have to battle against bitterness. I have to battle, kind of like Churchill with his father, to take the legacy, take the positive. Hey, I'm just making up a name now. Hey, Dr. Smith may have mistreated me in that situation, but boy, he sure taught me 4 or 5 other things that changed my life. I'm going to build on those 4 or 5 things. I'm going to forgive him for these other things, and I'm going to move on. So that is one of the big battles I fight. And it could really taint me. I mean, we all know bitter men are sitting at the end of a bar, mad at everybody, blew up every job they ever had on their 5th glass of whiskey, about to maybe blow up their marriage again by the flirting around with the waitress on the other side of the bar. My point is, bitterness makes you feel entitled, and entitlement makes you want to medicate and do everything bad that can destroy your life. So I don't do any of those things, but I'm just telling you, and I don't mind telling everybody watching. that I fight that. I battle that. So I'm actually at war with myself in that area. I'm actually at war. It's a tendency I have. I don't even know I fully understand how it happened, but I'm aware of it. So another guy, it might be anger and violence. Another guy, it might be who knows what. We all battle something, or we battle the matrix of things. So this battle that I'm describing is a natural battle. It has actual practical tactics that I can engage in. I go right up to people and express my forgiveness, or, hey, I'm sorry, I really took offense at that, and it's my fault. Please forgive me. I mean, I don't leave the room until I get things straightened out, because I don't want to take the thing home. I have to battle it spiritually. If I'm laying on my pillow at night, sometimes I'm just laying there with my mind drifting, and suddenly here comes this image of somebody wronging me. And, I don't know if everybody watching your show believes in a devil or not, but I think gremlins, demons are putting stuff in my ears, and I'm going, I am not going to carry this thing into my sleep, and so I'll stop and get up and take care of it. So that just happens to be my battle. And then, of course, there's also the battle we have for other people. I want to be able to battle for myself, so then I can go to war for my friends. I've got a friend who battles horrible depression, and he considers suicide when it hits. It's biochemical, probably, and also spiritual. He knows it. But in the moment, in the valley, those voices sound like they're telling him the truth. And so I'm one of his band of brothers, man, and we go to war for him. We pray for him. We go kick his butt. We take him to the movies. We shove food in his mouth. We do whatever we have to do. We hang out at his place. We get him working. Hey, why don't you come mow my yard? Shut up, come mow it anyway. That kind of thing, and overcome that stuff. We know how to go to war. We know how to go to war at every level: physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, etc. So that's what I mean by being a warrior. Every man's got to be a warrior. You will have a battle. And by the way, if you're going to lead other people, I need to say this very quickly before I end this topic. I love the phrase, the great statement from Philo of Alexandria: be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. And every man that you and I work with is fighting a great battle. In fact, every friend who we have, everybody we know, is fighting a great battle of some kind. And the goal of leading and the goal of coming alongside as a band of brothers is to join them in that battle. Mm-hmm. So I am peacefully at war all the time. I'm at war for my buddies. I'm at war for my kids. I'm at war for my wife. I'm at war for myself. During this coronavirus time, I'm at war to make sure there's a noble, inspiring, hopeful culture in my home. I'm at war against us eating too much. My wife and I have a glass of wine with dinner almost every evening, but we don't need to have two or three. You know what I'm saying? So we say that out loud to each other, and we battle against not some horrible tendency we have, but just something that might creep up on us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a man's got to know how to go to war. And most of us won't go to actual battlefields and pull actual triggers and drive actual tanks. But I stay close to that military culture, which is easy for me because I grew up in it. But I stay close to it because it gives me tactics and ideas and a spirit, really, culture that feeds into my kind of war, which is a different kind of thing, more internal.
I love that quote, by the way. Be kind. Everyone you face is probably is facing a battle of some sort.
Yeah, everybody's fighting a great battle of some kind. That's true.
Very true. It allows you to look at people with maybe a little bit more kindness and empathy versus, how could you or why would you, right?
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, because I know you've got a plane to catch, but the third chapter that really, really lit a fire under me is the fire of friendship. And you even talk about the decline of male friendships and how that kind of shows up. Like after we get married, or we buy the house, and now we buy the car, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I remember those guys. And as I think about them, like these fond memories, and I smile, and you can fill in the rest. So why do these male friendships decline with us? Why do we more or less live this life of more isolation as we get older?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our ancestors had male community built in. They had big families, they had tribes, they had compounds. Grandpa lived in the home. I've read a lot of stuff about the American West. Grandma lived in the home until their last days, and maybe great grandpa and grandma, etc. They just had it built in. In our society, we have to be intentional about friendships because we end up with rust friendships. A rust friendship, as psychologists call it, is the guy who was in your wedding you haven't talked to in 5 years. It's the guy you were in the Army with, and you thought you'd be buddies forever, but you haven't spoken to him, in years, and he's an occasional phone call. You need friends close enough to know your life without you having to narrate it. I need buddies up in my grill, as we say. I need guys who are able to call me at the last minute and say, hey, I'm going down to get some burgers. You want to go? You need men that close. And that's got to be intentional. Because if we let the natural American Western pattern happen, we'll get busy with the house and the two kids and the car and the garage and the yard and the job and the whatever. And we will lose friendships. But men need to have a band of brothers. They got to have guys around them. So who are you fighting for? Who's fighting for you? Who's close? Who's nearby? I'm grateful for the churches and other organizations that emphasize accountability groups. But as I've said sarcastically before, if you're in my accountability group, and that means I got to drive across town once a month and meet you for biscuits and gravy so I can tell you what's wrong with me so you can talk to me and help me, I'm dead. You're assuming I'm going to be honest. You're assuming I'm going to show up. You're assuming I'm going to remember. No, I need a guy who's watching my life, who's in my life, who's around, who knows Bev, who's in my home, who sees what's happening. And so friendships, that's why I described some of the great, powerful friendships of history in that chapter. Because men died for each other. Men gave themselves to each other. Men grieved the loss of a friend that men wore for decades. It's great. There are monuments to some of the great friendships in history, and we've got to restore that. We've got to let friendship be central. Friendships can't just be the thing you occasionally sneak off to do with the wife's permission, once a month because you need a little guy time, watching a movie or playing some golf. No, it's got to be built into your life. And by the way, if we do this right, we teach our wives what this means to us, they'll be thrilled because they'll get a better man, better father, better provider, better everything for it, better lover, better romance, better everything from a man who's fully engaged with other men. So friendship, steel sharpening steel, band of brothers, fun, rowdy, kick butt friendships are what we've got to have to be the men we're made to be. And a lot of what's going wrong with men today, even up to the male suicide rate, which is skyrocketing in the Western world, and the psychological postmortem always indicates that it's loneliness that's doing. Men literally kill themselves after writing the words, "Not a man knows if I'm alive or cares," on a piece of paper and then blowing their brains out. And I'm saying that this is part of the dysfunction of our society. So most men are awash in a sea of casual relationships. And I'm saying, screw the casual relationship. Do you have 5 men you would die for? Do you have 5 men who can turn to you and say, you were just unbelievably rude to your wife? What the heck is going on? Because I'm about to pound you, And or like in Bev's case, she knows the 6 or 7 guys that she can go to. If I flip out or if there's an emergency at 3 a.m. when I'm out of town or whatever, she knows who to call because we walk with these guys in life. We've got to have these friendships. Man was not meant to walk alone. Women are naturally good at this. They can make best friends in the line at Kroger. But we can't do that. And so we've got to be intentional about it. That's what that chapter's about.
Yeah, that one really spoke to me. One more question for you on this chapter. Sure. Explain to us, I know what it is, but the free fire zone.
The free fire zone is what you want to have with your band of brothers or your band of friends. Free fire zone means anything that needs to be addressed in my life or theirs to make us better will be. Nobody sits around wringing their hands going, oh my God, who's going to talk to them? I hope somebody does. No. If you and I are a band of brothers, if we're committed to each other, if we're in the same region, et cetera, and I see that, 1 glass of wine's become 5, or you're checking out the backside of the waitress, or 5 Oreos has become a whole bag, and you put on 40 pounds and you're stress eating, or whatever, you know what I mean? Just what, you're dropping the F-bomb now all the time, whatever. I'm talking to you about it, not because I want to dominate you, or not because I'm a legalist who's sin-sniffing legalist who wants to ruin your life, but because I know you've committed to me, you want to be a great man. And great men don't gain 40 pounds at a time on Oreos. Great men don't mistreat their wives. Great men don't, ignore the fact their son's up in their room with the door closed doing something he's ashamed about. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, this is the lore of men. Oh, yeah. So I've got men around me, and they can speak to me about anything. And they, if they don't call Bev every quarter or half a year just to check in with her, I'm mad at them. I want you to call Bev. I'm going to call your wife. I have your permission. I'm going to check in. What's going on? And it's not about trying to catch each other in some game of, hey, can I embarrass you? No, it's about making each other better. So the free fire zone means, in short, anything that needs to be addressed, anything that needs to be said to make me a better man will be said. And then whatever coaching comes afterwards, whatever challenge that comes afterwards to make that happen. And the same thing with other men. Nobody's sitting around wondering if somebody's going to address this thing. And let me assure you, with my band of brothers, that is not the threat, that anybody's going to go silent about anything that's wrong. We are upfront about everything. And it's done in a non-embarrassing way, but you don't get by with anything. Everything's addressed, you know? You don't get to just pull aside quiet to a time we have together and sit there and nurse your wounds. Somebody's going to say, "What's up with you? What are you mad about?" Somebody's what's going on? You can tell us right now. And it doesn't matter where we are at a dinner or what's going on. It's going to be discussed right at that moment. And that's healthy. That's what men need. You know, the banner of the New York Times, or the New York Times or the Washington Post is "Democracy dies in darkness." Well, so does manhood. Manhood dies in darkness. So we shine a light. And we help each other out. We have fun doing it.
Stephen, I could literally talk to you all day long, my friend. I know you got you're speaking my language, and you're definitely speaking the language of our audience. Gentlemen, again, we are speaking to Stephen Mansfield today. Men on Fire is his new book. I want to make sure that all the men can find you, your resources, your books, and if they want to connect with you, how can they do that? Great.
My personal website is stephenmansfield.tv. All of my social media personally is Mansfield Writes, whatever the account at Mansfield Writes on Twitter, etc. But for men, greatman.tv is the website we have. You'll get our podcast. We have a podcast and a weekly digest. You want to get that. And then, of course, get this book, Men on Fire. We specifically kept it out of hardback, and we're only printing it in paperback. So it's like 10 or 15 bucks. I can't remember what it is. You know, I don't know what the stores will be selling it for, but it's something in that range. And get it and study it and work it through with other men, because it's going to change some things. And the two other books, as you know, that I've done, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, big hardback book that's kind of an icebreaker for guys, and then a small movement book called Building Your Band of Brothers, which I recommend as well. So greatman.tv is how we oriented everything.
I love this. Stephen, thank you so much for your work. And thank you for helping us improve this generation of men and generations to come. Again, I could talk to you all day long. And I so appreciate you coming on today.
It's my privilege, man. Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Back at you. Gentlemen, for all the show notes to connect with Stephen Mansfield, go to gooddadproject.com/279 for this episode. Go out, live with purpose, and above all else, live legendary. Take care.